The first sector qualifier for Star Wars Unlimited, which is basically a GP for those of you that come in from Magic, was won by somebody who did quite the angle shoot in the top 8. I recently covered this in Lorcana, where the prizes on offer were a lot larger, to be fair, and the angle shoot was more egregious, if I'm honest, and the prizing was much larger too, including a trip to Disneyland. That player that was in this video, if you remember watching that or haven't watched it yet, you can go watch it now. That player who did the angle shoot and the sharking actually got their prizes revoked. The golden Mickey got moved on to another player, and they didn't get their invite to Disneyland. So that leads me to seeing the news on Star Wars Unlimited subreddit this morning that there was an angle shoot in the top 8 of the first Grand Prix, essentially, for Star Wars Unlimited, and it leaves a sour taste in my mouth. I'm going to unpack it completely. Like I said, it's not as egregious as the Lorcana one, but the reason that I want to cover it is that I want to, again, say that new games like Star Wars Unlimited or Lorcana shouldn't be allowing this stuff at a high level, because it gives your game a really bad rep, and a really bad offering to new players who might want to jump into Lorcana or Star Wars Unlimited and card games in general thanks to those IPs. More on that in a moment. If you want to buy any Star Wars Unlimited or any trading card stuff in America, go to coolstuffinc.com, use the code Kenobi at checkout to get 5% off your order. And if you're in Europe, it's magicmadhouse.co.uk, use the on-screen code. Again, they do sell Star Wars Unlimited, including Carbonite boosters, to get 5% off your order. On the left, we have Victor, who is the victim of this angle shoot. And on the right, we have Franciszek. I might be pronouncing that incorrectly. They are playing in a mirror match of Django Tarkin Town, which is basically the best deck in the game right now, and perhaps a problem that the creators of the game need to address. It was, I believe, 25% of the metagame, and then it converted to being the vast majority of the top 16, and it was all 4 decks in the top 4. The play goes like this. They untap for a new turn with the priority going to Victor. Franciszek decides to deploy Django, that is his leader unit, and Victor does the same. In Star Wars Unlimited, you essentially have a commander that has a requirement for a number of resources or lands in play in order to put them into play. Franciszek goes to tap down, or exhaust, should I say, the Django that Victor has, and Victor casts a spell that allows him to look 7 cards deep and look for a vehicle in his deck. He hits this, the War Juggernaut, a huge linchpin part of the Django Fett strategy. The War Juggernaut gets +1/+0 for each damage unit in play, and when it enters the battlefield, it does 1 damage to each of any number of units on the battlefield. And as we see from the video, Victor signifies that it's going to hit all of Franciszek's creatures or units. It ends up killing one of them, and he puts a count on his own unit too. The important interaction is that Django, when you damage other people's units, allows you to tap their units, especially when he's fully deployed. It allows you to tap all units that get damaged by him without having to exhaust him like he does when he's not deployed. In Star Wars Unlimited, the deployed version of your leader has a better version of its undeployed effect usually. As we can see, Django is in play, damage has been done, and Victor is cleaning up looking at the top 7 cards of his library thanks to Dark Raid. As you can see, Franciszek puts 1 creature in the bin, puts damage on all of his things, waits for Victor to finish cleaning up and putting the cards on the bottom of his library, and then immediately tries to respond by taking an action. In Star Wars Unlimited, you go back and forth taking an action each. It's not turn by turn, it's action by action. There is a bit of a pause from Franciszek, waiting for the damage count to go on the War Juggernaut, but the interesting thing is, well, there's a few things here. Firstly, he tries to play a card that he cannot legally cast, which is his own War Juggernaut. He suddenly realizes that and swaps it for a different card instead, targeting and tapping down the opponent's War Juggernaut using his Django Fett's ability. At this point, Victor points to the other 2 cards on the board and says, why aren't they tapped? And Franciszek says that he's missed the trigger. This goes to a judge call, a long-winded judge call that takes quite some time, and as you can see from Victor's composure over the course of the judge call, it just gets worse as he's told he's missed this trigger, and the trigger is brutal. Like, it's an absolutely massive swing because all 3 of these units can activate and attack now. There's also a extra bit of information here. This first order soldier that went into the bin after getting pinged by the War Juggernaut on Franciszek's side had a mandatory damage trigger that was never resolved. It was completely skipped and missed. And although it's a damage to an opposing creature or an opposing unit or Victor's, it can also be beneficial because if you were to put it on the Django, for example, for whatever reason, it would buff the Juggernaut because it gets bonus from damage units in play. It's irrelevant. And more importantly, it's a mandatory, unmissable trigger that was missed in the rush to play a card. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that May triggers should be mandatory. In the case of Django's ability to tap things down, I do believe it can be missed. I've talked about this in Magic the Gathering quite a bit. I've talked about how Chalice of the Void is a magic card that you can test against, you can check your opponent on. It has an ability to counter a spell, but if you cast it and your opponent who controls the Chalice misses the trigger, your spell will resolve through it. The problem is when it comes to May triggers like this is that you shouldn't try and test them or ignore them at points where people are distracted. For example, in this case, Franciszek absolutely tried to slam a spell at the first opportunity where he thought Victor had passed priority. He even slammed the wrong one and missed a mandatory trigger on one of his deaths of his units to try and get a unit down to then say, sorry bro, you missed it. The window for missing it was so small, it was play a card, fuck it up, put that card back in hand, play another card, ping and tap down something else and say, sorry, you didn't tap my stuff. It's pretty dumb. Again, I'm not saying you can't miss the Django trigger or miss May triggers in general in card games when it's allowed by the rules. I think that should be something that is in the rules of games, because your opponent shouldn't be the one babysitting all of your triggers, and thus that's why I think the majority of the time why May triggers should be able to be missed. But in this case, it's so fucking clear what Victor was doing. It's a mirror match where both of the players are playing the same cards and know how they work. The commentary team on 2 separate occasions mention how the War Juggernaut taps down the team. They mention hitting off the Dark Raid is really important for tapping down the team, and then during the conversation while the judge ruling is going on, the 2 commentators talk about how the War Juggernaut is such a massive tempo swing because it takes all the pressure off. Unfortunately, if you push your opponent by slamming a card into play and not letting them resolve their full action, it doesn't push that pressure, does it? Both the commentators knew what was up, both the players knew what was up, and that led to Franciszek angle shooting, essentially, seeing a moment where they could gotcha somebody because they hadn't clearly denoted that these things should have been tapped. Now, how do we avoid this and what should happen going forward? Well, to be fair, Victor should have been as clear as possible, but I also think that in this circumstance, it's very obvious he was getting scummed by someone looking for an opportunity. And I think when it comes to card games, especially new ones that are running their first high-level events like this, that are giving away promo cards and medals, that Franciszek won the entire event and got the medal for first place, I think that those things lose their merit and lose their strength, lose their prestige when you allow angle shooting to be the way that a game is determined. I think that sucks a lot. And it makes your game look worse to the outside looking in as well. Like I said, new players. Lorcana had a worse example of this, but people who've never played a card game in their lives are drawn in by this new stuff, whether it be Disney or in this case, Star Wars, and then they get turned off when they see that people are angle shooting and sharking each other on like semantic arguments at the table. I think that really, really does not help the games grow into being a respected competitive endeavor. And it looks bad to established card game players like myself too. Star Wars Unlimited is the card game that gives me the most excitement outside of Magic right now. It is the one that I am tempted to buy into a deck of and play, perhaps not when one deck is dominant as much as Django is, but perhaps afterwards. Hell, there's a deck that is like Tron meets Death and Taxes. I'm not joking. It both ramps and steals your opponent's resources and destroys them. It sounds awesome. But the problem is with Lorcana and Star Wars Unlimited, and Flesh and Blood has this issue too, is that a lot of the players who have previously played Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic competitively and moved away from those games for reasons, some of those reasons may be they don't like how the game is currently handled, or it could be that they've got a bad rep in those games already. They end up showing up on the radar of these card games and doing this sort of shit. We had it with the player who did the sharking on Lorcana was a known entity. There was a lot of reports in the Reddit thread of people knowing that he was banned from a local store already. Franciszek, I didn't see or find anything on, and this could have just been an opportunistic angle shoot that wasn't cool. It may not be what they always operate like. But we also saw angle shooting in Flesh and Blood a year or two back by a player who was banned from Magic for taking too many promos, then lying to a judge and a tournament organizer about doing so. That's Matthew Folks in the Fun Strand incident. What I'm saying is you've got to be careful with your card game about allowing people in who've already got a shit rep elsewhere. Now, I'm not saying you preemptively ban people or gatekeep people who've got bad reps in other card games. Of course not. For a start, people can reform, people can grow, right? In the case of all of these players, they can get better and improve upon the shit they were doing when they were young, dumb, and full of bad ideas. But I do think you need to be quite strict and stringent about how you want to allow angle shooting in your games. Flesh and Blood went on record about being very blatant about you have to manage your triggers, allowing someone to miss a on-hit discard your hand trigger. Ugh. There's this thing in tabletop gaming where you don't and shouldn't have to babysit your opponent knowing their rules, how their cards work, their triggers and such, and that's why I'm so for being able to miss May triggers. But I don't think people should be able to weaponize that to be a strategy to win. Like, Franciszek is obviously very good at the game, having played, I think it was 16 rounds of Star Wars Unlimited, including playing mirrors that are arguably quite skill intensive. Like, they are evidently a good player. They shouldn't have to resort to this shit to get that final edge. It sucks. I've got a video on the chalice checking example careful where my opponent was checking my chalice, but only at the point that I started to have an asthma attack and was digging in my bag for an inhaler. It was very clear for the turns prior where I was fully focused on the game, they weren't going to try it. And they only tried it when I was distracted. Doing these things when your opponents are distracted, pushing them to take actions and rushing them by slamming things into play, neither of those things are okay. And I think it's a real shame that the first Star Wars Unlimited event that I want to look at some coverage for is marred with this kind of stuff. It kind of sucks. Big shout out to Victor for sharing his story on the Star Wars Unlimited subreddit as well, and I hope we just have some more clarity around these things in future. I guess from the judges' perspective, they couldn't like go back and fix this after the fact, but at the time they should have spotted that František actually tried to play the wrong spell, which is not a punishable thing, sure, but it is an indication that perhaps you're rushing a bit there, and you missed a mandatory trigger, which we should go back and put on the stack and resolve. And I say stack, Star Wars Unlimited doesn't have a stack, but also then that shortens that gap for Victor to miss this thing that they both knew he was trying to do. In short, it's unsporting and it's bollocks, and I hope this doesn't show up more in Star Wars Unlimited. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. There'll be more magic videos later today, and I'll see you in the next one. Ta-ta for now.